Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, Tom. Hello, commissioners. We're all coming together at 2 p.m.
All right, welcome back, commissioners, the afternoon, and over to you, Chair Harrington.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a nice lunch. We have two topics remaining on our agenda for this afternoon. And a brief reminder, Ms. Erin Calvert, one of the assistant county administrators, is here on behalf of our CAO, Ms. Angie, who is out for the afternoon. The next topic is the Saltzman Road improvement options. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Stephen Roberts and his team from Land Use and Transportation. Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you. We're glad to be back. This is a follow-up presentation to a briefing that we gave back in May of 2021. It's hard to believe it's been a year and more already, but we've been steadily working on this project and do want to bring back some updated information to you in follow-up to the briefing that we had back in May, some direction that we heard from you and some additional work that we've done in response. And I do want to make a quick introduction of our team members. I have Joe Yonkins with me. He's our Capital Projects Services Division Manager, and his team is actually moving this project forward. We have may have Marla Vick. Marla's a principal project manager in Joe's group. Ben Lively is our project manager for this particular project. And then we have not promoted him to a panelist, but I did want to note that Terry Song, who is, you heard from earlier actually under the Clean Water Services budget item, is on the call as well. And Terry is a consultant that's working on this project with us, and so he may be able to help answer questions or provide additional info later in the presentation. Let's see, so I think next slide, please. Next slide.
Next slide, please.
Yep, thanks. Okay, so just real quickly, we've got a lot of slides to cover, and so don't hesitate to stop and ask questions along the way, but I do want to try to move through relatively quickly and be respectful of your time. We will go back and look at some of the background information related to this project that may be important for you. Recap very briefly what we talked about at the work session back in May 2021. We'll run through new information, and that includes a refinement of the eastern alignment, or that would be improvements on the existing road alignment. We have some information about potential improvements to 130th Avenue north of Laidlaw Road. That was a topic of discussion back in May 21. And then some additional information from a recent online open house that we conducted. And then afterward, we look for some board discussion, answer questions, and then let us know if you have input that will help inform an alignment decision or if you'd like more information from us. Next slide. So briefly, and we'll circle back to these at the end, the questions that we're looking to run through today. Again, are you prepared to provide guidance on a preferred alignment? And if so, is there any feedback you'd like to give us moving forward? If not, what additional information would assist the board with making a recommendation or making a decision? And would you like to provide any preliminary guidance on our bicycle pedestrian facility selection for this project? That's typically another step in this process, but may inform our discussion now. Next slide. So a quick refresher on the context. This is in Commissioner District 2, sort of in the far northeast portion of the county. This is north of Thompson Road and south of Laidlaw Road. This is in CPO 7, but very close to the border with CPO 1, so both CPOs have been quite interested in this particular project. The current conditions, I think, don't need to remind you, but Saltzman Road currently has very narrow lanes. It's quite steep. There's a fairly sharp curve just as you start moving downhill if you're traveling northbound. It has no shoulders and no bike or pedestrian facilities today in this section. So there are two alignments that you see sort of roughly depicted on the slide there. And I wanted to note too, the green properties that you're seeing, those are parcels that are owned by Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later into the presentation. Next slide. Just a quick visual reminder of what things look like there on Saltzman Road right now. This is at the culvert that crosses Ward Creek just south of Laidlaw Road, and in particular quite narrow there, and you can see that it's pretty common for large vehicles to overtrack the center line going through there. Next slide. So we wanted to step back and really think about what is the fundamental goal that we're trying to achieve by advancing a project here. And so really it's about safety. We're trying to improve safety, and we're trying to improve it for everyone who might use the road, whether you're in a vehicle, biking, walking, or rolling. And so the way we are envisioning doing that would be, of course, adding the bicycle and pedestrian facilities that aren't there today, increasing the width of the vehicle travel lanes to something that's more passable for even larger vehicles, and adding turn lanes at intersections. And so in this case, that's the very north end of the project at Laidlaw, and at the south end at Bayonne Lane. Either option will definitely be an improvement over the safety of the current situation, and then the two alignments have different benefits and impacts that certainly are influencing the discussion and eventually the selection of a preferred alternative moving forward. Next slide. So quickly, just to look back at the transportation system plan designation, Saltzman Road is designated as a collector, and the red circle there highlights the area that we're focusing on today. There is the existing alignment is the solid line, and then the western alignment is a dotted line. It was added into the transportation system plan in 2014, and you'll note that it aligns with 130th Avenue, which is a blue line to the north of Laidlaw, and the blue line indicates that 130th Avenue is a neighborhood route, so it's a lower grade roadway than a collector. And you'll note on the map there is an arrow that's shown in the area that's in green on this slide actually is referencing areas in Multnomah County that are currently designated as rural reserves. And I think you're familiar with some of the restrictions around rural reserves. They're intended to remain in place through 2060, and they do limit the ability for transportation planning for new roadways in rural reserve areas. So there is some potential that 130th Avenue could be extended north to connect to Springville at some point in the future, but we certainly view that as a longer term possibility. And of course, it's in a different county that would have to make its own planning decisions as well. Next slide. This map just shows from the transportation system plan the bikeway designations for the roads there. And there are some dashed lines that I'll note. Those are either planned or existing trails that have been or will be constructed at some point. And again, you'll see on both the western and the eastern alignment are shown here. And this segment of Saltzman Road is designated as what is called a major street bikeway. In the transportation system plan, that's defined as an assumption that a 6-foot on-street bike lane or a buffered bike lane is considered sufficient for this type of road. Next slide. So funding, to date there is $6.5 million that has been allocated for improvements to this segment of Saltzman Road. That's a combination of two different funding sources. $1.2 million from the Bonnie Slope West Infrastructure Funding Plan, and then that was initially earmarked for interim improvements on the existing alignment, which the intent was really to construct a sidewalk probably on one side of the roadway as an interim measure. There was an additional $5.3 million dedicated in the MSTIP 3E program in 2016, and that was designated either for funding what we assumed at the time was the full cost of improving on the existing alignment, or partial funding toward improvements on the western alignment. So the board can direct staff, if you choose. We could combine these two funding sources and they could be used then to make improvements on either alignment. And then we've determined, as I alluded to, that some additional funding is going to be needed regardless of which alignment is selected ultimately. This might be a good chance to pause really quickly. Any questions or anything on this background information? Okay, thank you. Next slide then. So very quickly, let's take a look at our May 2021 work session. Again, we covered some of the same material, some of it in a little bit more depth than we did this time. Again, the project overview, funding allocations, and the basic improvement options. We also shared with you input and recommendations from a project advisory committee that staff formed to try to help provide input and feedback from community members about the different alignment options that were under consideration. And we talked then at that time about some potential next steps. So what we heard from the board at that meeting was a request to do some refinement to the eastern alignment, which we've done, prepare some additional visualizations to help compare the two different alignments side by side, how they would look and feel, and then some additional coordination with our partners at Clean Water Services and Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District. Next slide. So basically this slide says more or less the same things. We've basically been working on those things that we talked about at the last meeting. So the new information, and I'll note here, you see on this slide it says new information. We've tried to flag that whenever you see something that was not included or discussed back in the May 2021 work session. So we have developed a third option for the eastern alignment, and it's sort of a hybrid between the first two options that we looked at and that were shared with the board back in May. We've done some visual simulations of that alignment. We also, as I mentioned earlier, looked at a concept plan and a cost estimate for improvements to 130th Avenue north of Laidlaw. We have continued our discussions in coordination with Clean Water Services and Tualatin Hills Park and Rec. And then we also convened the Project Advisory Committee again, and I appreciate Chair Harrington and Commissioner Treese were able to attend that meeting. And we did share the revised Eastern alignment that we had come up with, and it didn't really result in any change in the recommendation from the PAC members that were in attendance that night. So the PAC recommendation still remains the Western alignment. And then most recently, as I mentioned, we held a public open house and received some public comments and feedback on that. We'll cover that in more detail. Next slide. So a quick refresher, unfortunately for some of these maps, north is going to be to the left because of the orientation of the slides. So Laidlaw Road is the road on the left of the slide, and then Bayonne Lane is on the right hand of the slide. So again, this is just giving you a high-level overview of those two different alignments side by side. And there are some green areas that you'll see near the two curves, really, on the existing alignment. Those are potential locations for water quality facilities. However, through some more creative stormwater and surface water management solutions, one or both of those could potentially be eliminated or reconfigured in some way too. And that would be true for either, I think, either alignment. Next slide, please. So we'll take a look at the west alignment, and in both cases you'll see that these alignments are 2 lanes in the middle where we don't have any need for turns, and 3 lanes at either end where we do have turn lanes dedicated. In this case, we have the current proposal shows on-street buffered bike lanes on both sides of the roadway, as well as sidewalks. This alignment achieves a 35-mile-per-hour design speed throughout the project and does include a fairly long multi-span bridge over, it says Ward Creek there, I just realized it's actually a combination, it's after Bronson Creek and Ward Creek merged together, and I believe it's called Bronson Creek at this location. Yes, Chair.
I'm just noticing on this slide, and I may be misunderstanding the colors, but on the bridge span that is just above the brown area, sort of in the middle of the slide,
Hmm.
it looks like the white line is now gray, and I don't know what that means.
Uh, I I see what you're saying. You know, I think that might just be some sort of a anomaly in the graphic. There
Okay,
should actually be a continuous, yeah, that's, the white line is meant to depict the bike lane striping.
okay. And I just wanted to confirm, when I looked at the packet previously, I only had my cell phone. It looks to me, and I'm just looking for confirmation here, that the width of the bridge span over on each ends might be 3 lanes because of turn lanes. But in a portion of it where it doesn't need to accommodate turn lanes, it's just through, that the the width of the bridge would change so that the lane widths were similar all the way through. It's just the number of lanes would change between the ends having 3 versus the middle. And the reason that I'm asking for this confirmation is because of impervious surfaces.
Mhm.
And there's a cost uh, for having continuous lanes that are not needed for turning traffic. Right? Oftentimes in Washington County, we see center turn lanes because there are more driveways on a roadway. Uh, but I want to make sure we're reducing the amount of overall impervious surface where we in fact don't have the opportunity of turning traffic. So could you just confirm for me, as I'm looking at this, that portions of that bridge, or perhaps example in that middle section, it would be a slightly narrower bridge span than having this 3-lane bridge span from end to end?
Yes, so and I might look to Terry or Ben to fill in my information gaps here, but I think that what you'll see is at the north end, or the left-hand side of the slide, I should say, you'll see it's 3 lanes. It does taper down to 2 lanes, so the width of the bridge is wider at the north end or the left side than it is at the south end or on the right. So it is reducing in width. The narrowest point in the road is really actually kind of in that area where you notice that white line was missing. That's the stretch that's really just 2 lanes, and then it starts to widen out again. Yep, just to the just after the curve on the south end. Yeah, and that's an excellent point, and I want to just mention on both alignments we've taken that same approach of just only providing the left turn lanes where they're needed, sort of at the 2 ends of the project.
It looks like your consultant may have something to provide for you as well.
Yes, go ahead, Terry. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, great explanation. And Chair Harrington, that's correct. We've minimized the section, which I believe we have some cross sections shown later in the slideshow. We'll minimize the amount of pavement for turn movements.
Yep, that's correct. Great. Thank you, Terry.
And just for the sake of the recording of this meeting, because I don't see it in my packet information, Mr. Song, could you share with me what consultant group you're with and participating here in this meeting for?
Yes, my name is Terry Song. I am the project manager for Murray Smith. We're a consulting firm in Portland.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, and thank you, Chair, for letting us note that. Thank you. Okay, if no other questions, then I think we can move on to the next slide. So this is what Terry was just alluding to. We do have these 2 cross sections that show what a 3-lane section looks like and what the 2-lane section looks like. As I noted earlier, we're currently showing buffered bike lanes and sidewalks on both sides throughout the project. And again, the 2 lanes in the middle, 3 lanes at either end. Any questions on that? Okay, next slide, please. So you'll see profiles, we call these. So these are sort of exaggerated, but it's to an engineering methodology for showing the grade of the road, if you will. So what we see here on the west alignment, there's about 80 feet of total grade change from the top of the hill down to Laidlaw Road. And that results in about a 10% grade across the project here in the middle part. And you can see the multi-span bridge structure there in the drawing. Next slide. And we have a few visualizations. You've seen these before for the west alignment. So this is looking on Laidlaw Road west of the western alignment. So on Laidlaw Road looking east, so you see the bridge there to the right, and then that large vacant property that you see on the right there, that is one of the properties owned by THPRD. Next slide. So again, on Laidlaw, now looking more to the south at the bridge there. And I'll note on this slide, there are some tan areas that you see with planting on them. Those are fill areas to bring the grade of the road up before the bridge starts. And those were depicted in the plan slide that we saw earlier with those sort of brown triangular areas on either side of the roadway. Next slide. This is looking from more up near the top of the hill, looking down, and so you are looking toward Laidlaw Road, and we see the Arbor Heights subdivision is the development in the background there, and the THPRD property is to the left on this slide. Next slide. And again, this is now looking back south up toward the top of the hill there, and just showing that typical bridge section here in this location with the buffered bike lanes and sidewalks. Any questions on any of those? Okay, next slide, please. So this is the plan view for the east alignment, and again, as we've talked about, 3 lanes at both ends, 2 lanes through most of the middle of the project. And this, as I mentioned earlier, is a hybrid version between 2 options that we shared with you back in May. The first option would have maintained a 35-mile-per-hour design speed through the entire project, but required the purchase and demolition of a home that's located near the curve at the right edge of the slide, or on the right-hand curve here, south curve. We did a different alignment option that avoided the house, but had sort of back-to-back curves, serpentine curves. And this is a hybrid that designs the curve in such a way that it maintains a 25-mile-per-hour design speed, avoids needing to remove the existing home there, and then also avoids the double curves that we saw in one of the earlier options that we looked at. Excuse me. Other than the curve there, it does maintain a 35-mile-per-hour design speed. Just at this one curve, it would be reduced to 25. And I would note the current curves at both ends of this project are currently signed for 20 miles per hour as an advisory speed, just because of the sharpness of the curves and the gradient of the change in grade that happens right at that south curve. Next slide. We'll come back to it. So this is the proposed cross section. And again, you'll see the 2 lanes and 3 lanes here. I will note on, excuse me, on the eastern alignment, because we are attempting to minimize some impacts on some adjacent properties, we have proposed 11-foot vehicle travel lanes here instead of 12 feet in the other alignment. And we're proposing, in this case, not so much for width purposes, but because of the relative steepness, we suggested a multi-use path on the uphill side which would allow cyclists to ride outside of the actual roadway, because we anticipate they'll be moving slower than normal in an environment like this, whereas on the downhill side, cyclists tend to gain quite a lot of speed, and so remaining on the roadway separated from the pedestrians seems more appropriate there. I would note that there is the possibility of considering the idea of an uphill multi-use path on both alignments. If the board's interested in doing that, that's something that we can explore. Next slide, please. This results in a roughly 60-foot elevation change between the top of the hill and Laidlaw Road. It does have about an 8.5% grade at the middle section of the project. And then I didn't note it earlier in the plan view, but this project, this alignment assumes that there's an existing fairly small culvert at Ward Creek that would be replaced and upgraded with a both wildlife and fish-friendly culvert design. Next slide. So we've got a few visualizations. So this is at the northern, this is the southern curve looking north. And so again, you'll see the bike lane on the downhill side and the bicyclist on a multi-use path on the uphill side. And this is also one of those locations where the roadway is tapering down from 3 lanes to 2. So you see that center turn lane narrowing, or that median narrowing here. Next slide. This is down looking toward the northern curve, still looking north. Next slide. Still looking north here. This is at the culvert along Ward Creek. And you can see here, this is a point where the road has widened back out to provide the space for the 3rd lane, the turn lane at the Laidlaw Road intersection. Next slide. Oh, I apologize. It looks like we missed a label on this slide, but this is looking north in this case. So looking sort of uphill is to the left of the slide. And so again, you'll see the bike lane on the downhill side and the mixed use path on the uphill side.
So Stephen,
yes,
if I could ask a question.
of course.
So earlier in the presentation, you had an existing condition slide that showed a truck traveling southbound and going over the double yellow line, as well as a double truckload traveling northbound doing a similar thing. And I did not note for myself what the lane widths are currently. So you've let us know here that for the eastern alignment that the lane widths are 11 or proposed to be 11 feet. Could you remind me what the lane width is currently?
I'll again probably look to Ben or Terry for confirmation. My recollection is they're between about 8.5 and 9 feet wide currently.
Okay, that helps. That's useful to me because I was trying to figure out, okay, how would those 2 examples relate to these proposed designs? Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, that's a great information point, and we'll make sure to include that going forward too. That's very useful. Any other questions on the east alignment before we move on? Okay, next slide, please. And a more detailed version of these sort of side-by-side alignment comparisons was included in your packet, as well as in the recent online open house. So we really were trying to just, as best as we could, try to compare the 2 different alignments on a variety of key points and just provide some information about how the 2 sort of stack up with each other. As I mentioned earlier, they both, I think, will do a good job of improving safety, but there are these other impacts and benefits that definitely warrant discussion. So looking at the 2 here, the cost, and these are, I would say, 2021 cost estimates. I do want to note that we are proposing to move Saltzman Road forward in the discussion of our upcoming funding allocation for MSTIP 2328. And so we do have a consultant who's also revisiting the cost estimates for this project along with all of the other candidate projects, so that we're getting good updated cost information. So I would just want to be clear that the cost estimates we're showing here are a little bit dated, but I think in terms of order of magnitude, should give us a pretty good sense of how the two options compare. So based on the existing funding that's been allocated to construct the western alignment, we believe we need about $13 million excuse me, in additional funds. And the eastern alignment, again, with the previously dedicated funding, we anticipate needing roughly $2 million additional funds. And again, I think I noted this at our prior work session. Both of these cost estimates do include 40% contingencies, and so those are a risk management tool. Just because we don't know all the details yet, we haven't been through the permitting process, and there may yet be some unknowns in there that could potentially increase those costs a little bit. So we've tried to account for that level of currently known information in those cost estimates. So as I mentioned, we have on the western alignment the bridge. It crosses a relatively wide floodplain area, and then the bridge itself would be designed for current seismic standards. At the east alignment, again, as I mentioned, we'd be looking to upgrade an existing culvert, which is over it's not actually in the regulatory 100-year floodplain. It's beyond the extents of the mapped floodplain, but it certainly has water and would need to be designed in order to help ensure that it meets all stormwater management criteria. And again, the culvert itself would also be designed for current seismic standards as well. And as I mentioned earlier too, the culvert would be intended to facilitate wildlife passage as well. We talked about the grades earlier, and visual impact, we heard a lot of discussion about that in the PAC meeting and in other forums. The western alignment, the bridge itself, because it's a new alignment in a relatively open area, is certainly more visible. The existing alignment tends to be in a fairly heavily treed area, and so the impact from adjacent neighborhoods is going to be somewhat less. Next slide, please. Oops, sorry, back one, please. Thank you. So with the western alignment, so it aligns with 130th Avenue, so it does provide more direct access to the Arbor Heights neighborhood from the south. And the western alignment, because it is a new roadway off the existing alignment, could be constructed with a relatively shorter construction closure. The eastern alignment, because it is upgrading an existing constrained roadway, would require a fairly lengthy construction closure while the road itself is being upgraded. And there are limited detour routes, and so detouring around this closure will be a little bit out of direction, certainly for folks. Both properties do have some wetland and stormwater or floodplain impacts. The western alignment appears to significantly affect some existing wetland areas, and then, as I mentioned, crosses that relatively wide floodplain. The eastern alignment, or improvements to the existing alignment, appears to have a relatively more limited impact on a single wetland area. Natural habitat, again, our assessment is that there's more impact from the western alignment because you are creating a new roadway corridor, and on the existing alignment, again, less impactful as we're improving on an already impacted corridor. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the road design standard, the western alignment meets the county's design standards. The eastern alignment does, with that exception that we talked about, which is needing a lower design speed at the southern curve to try to help avoid having to remove a residence there. Are there any questions on these two slides before we go on? Okay, thank you. Next slide. So just a reminder, we did have a project advisory committee that we formed, and this lists the members and affiliations of those members. And as we mentioned earlier, 6 of the 8 members did support the western alignment. Next slide. These slides just provide a quick summary of comments or reasons for the support. And you'll see in the middle column, we asked PAC members for a first and a second preference. And you'll notice in some cases there were people who suggested either build one alignment or don't build anything. And so that's where you see no build was I prefer one alignment and perhaps not doing anything with the other alignment if that were an impact. And so you'll see some of the reasons again. West alignment does not affect any existing homes, but the east alignment again lower environmental impact. And we'll come back to THPRD comments in a little bit too. So next slide is another slide capturing some of the PAC member comments. And again, the feedback fairly closely mirrors much of the evaluation criteria that we just talked through as well. Next slide, please. We also met with CPO 7 in January of 2021, and subsequently the CPO steering committee submitted a letter in September of 2021 and then a minor clarification to that letter in December of 2021. And they reiterated in all of those forums and documents their strong preference for the Western alignment. Again, I think they have articulated that the existing conditions are not safe. The Western alignment is the safer of the alternatives. The Western alignment better fits with the long-term transportation plan, and I think that's a reference to that potential future extension of 130th Avenue into Multnomah County. They noted both have environmental impacts. There was some belief stated that funds were to be only allocated for the Western alignment, but as we discussed earlier, the funding that's been set aside was intended to be somewhat flexible. And they noted then that all of the PAC members who were not associated with an agency supported the Western alignment. Any questions on any of that? All right, next slide, please. So we've received a couple of pieces of input from the Beaverton School District. We actually had a contact from their transportation division, and they indicated a support for the Western alignment, and that being due to the shorter closure and detour duration that would be needed for the West alignment during construction. We also had the principal for the Findlay School, which is the local school just down the street, as a member of the project advisory committee, and he's also a community member. He supported the Eastern alignment, and primarily just due to the lower cost associated with it. Next slide. We also had a representative from Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue on the project advisory committee, and their response when asked about the project is that they support any option that would improve this area. And you know, from the existing conditions, the PAC representative representing the district on the committee did also prefer the Western alignment, and again, primarily due to it being a straighter roadway that connects to 130th Avenue. Next slide. So we looked at a map earlier that showed some properties owned by THPRD, and this document reflects those parcels outlined in green on the slide here. And you can see in red the two different alignments are sort of roughly sketched in there. And so the west alignment affects what's a property that's referred to as BCGL. And then the existing east alignment connects up to a couple of properties labeled Sioux Property and Northeast Park, closer to Laidlaw Road. Next slide. So input from THPRD.
Stephen, could you go back one slide for me, please?
Certainly.
I need to ask a clarifying question.
Sure.
If the Western alignment, so I see with the red markings, the Western alignment and the Eastern alignment. Given the nomenclature, Northeast Park, I am assuming that THPRD is planning human access to Northeast Park. And I don't know if they're planning human access. I don't mean just staff like maintenance access, but I mean public people access to the BCGL property.
Mhm.
So my question is, let alone the Sioux property. My question is, if public access is expected for any of these properties, has that been taken into account?
That is a really prescient question, actually. And so, actually, the next slide, we showed some feedback that we received from THPRD, and that is one of the points that they actually raised. And so, maybe if we can go to that next slide, and then we certainly can flip back to this one too, if that's helpful. But yeah, so the Park District has pretty steadfastly supported improvements on the existing alignment or the eastern alignment. And they've cited that the pedestrian experience of a roadway that's essentially on the ground or close to the ground is probably better than for up on a relatively high bridge. And they prefer the direct connection of this alignment to the Northeast Park area. So Northeast Park is a proposed community park, and so it certainly will have public access and activities planned for that site, although the district has not yet gone through a master planning process for any of these properties at this time. And then they referenced habitat, so the road and bridge embankments and on the BCGL property, they do have some concerns because they acquired that property with the anticipation that it will be used as a natural area restoration. Again, they have not done a planning process for that property yet, and so there is some thought that it could have some access via a small trailhead on that site, but would not likely be a true sort of active park location with expected high volumes of people there for activities.
So my difficulty is, if we could go back to slide 35. Given all of, over the course of over the last year especially, and if not longer, it's difficult for me to understand how they're envisioning allowing public access to the Northeast Park from the south via Saltzman Road, right? I don't see how this design is including any driveway access to that property. Now, maybe via Laidlaw Road, so at the southerly extent, but that doesn't impact the east design over the west design. So it just seems like a little conflicting to me for back on slide 30 with the original and current PAC comments with regard to direct route to Northeast Park. That statement doesn't, I'm not seeing the vision
Mm-hmm.
of access to Northeast Park. In my viewpoint, it all would have to happen from the north, and that doesn't change whether it's an eastern or a western access.
Yeah, I think I take your point, and maybe if we could go back to the map slide 35. Yeah, thank you. I think the idea was that, and maybe Ben has been more engaged in some of the direct conversations than I have, but I think the idea was that for folks maybe primarily from the south, the existing alignment provides a more direct way of accessing the Northeast Park, which again would be the bulk of the sort of human focused activity areas in the
How?
area.
That's my question. How?
Right, right. Well, just by walking down the road from the neighborhoods to the south and over to the park site. And I certainly understand your comment or your question about, I think, thinking about
But your
vehicular access.
design, but wait a second.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. It's going, your thoughts going a little faster than my brain could compute. Because if I go back to slide 26, where we're looking from the north, so what? They're expecting pedestrians to jump that guardrail and that steep
Oh,
embankment? Because the
so let,
other side is an uphill.
right, right. Maybe if we could go back to slide 25, just one more back, please. So I think in this view, you're seeing the park property is on the right-hand side. So the
Before the
guardrail,
curve, right?
let's see, this is north of the curve. So this is getting close to Laidlaw, but not quite to Laidlaw.
So,
And so you can see the guardrail will end before we get to Laidlaw Road. And so I
so
think
if
there
you
are,
go from slide 25 to
Mhm,
slide 35, if
mhm.
I understand this point properly, aren't we right at, see the dashed lines from south to north?
Mhm.
Aren't we right at just below the fourth, between the third and the fourth dashes, where that little green nubbin is?
I think so. If you can see, there's kind of a cyan colored line. That's actually,
Cyan.
yeah.
Green,
Well, it's the sort of bluish color,
turquoise?
turquoise. Thank you.
I thought
Um,
that was the creek.
yeah, so that's the creek, and so that slide 25 image is taken look from the creek looking to the north toward Laidlaw Road, and then the
No, I don't agree with that statement. If we go back to slide 25, see, what am I looking at ahead? Is that Laidlaw or is that the curve?
yes, so Laidlaw Road is
Right in
if,
front of that white car?
right,
Ah,
correct,
that's
correct.
bingo. Now
Yeah,
I'm with you. Now I track you. I was further up north,
gotcha. Right.
assuming that thing in front of the white car was the curve. But of course, that
Okay.
doesn't make sense now that I think about it, because there's no turn lane, right?
Right. Right.
Okay,
Right. Yeah. No, this is
so
great. This is a good. These are good questions.
now I follow you, but still they didn't speak up to say, we want any access. So why are you putting a guardrail in where we need access?
Hmm. Yeah, and I can maybe turn to Ben or Terry to just give us a little bit of insights about the guardrail there. And I don't think, again, because the park district really hasn't gotten into their planning effort, we don't know exactly what they're thinking in terms of where vehicular access would be taken from the site. As you said, it might be Laidlaw might be the most prudent location to do that. And again, I think the point of the input from the park district was thinking again about probably the pedestrian route to get into the park site. Following that existing alignment would be a more direct way for folks who live to the south to be able to access the park site on foot and I guess by vehicle as well.
But isn't there, excuse me, just I'm interrupting your conversation here, but the trail goes through there as well, which would be an access point, correct?
Our understanding is that the the east-west trail that's proposed here would actually daylight and cross Saltzman Road at the Laidlaw intersection.
But doesn't it show the dotted line, the white dotted line going through Northeast Park?
Yes.
So that would be another access point is all I'm bringing up.
Well, I think, yeah, so I think their current thinking is that east-west crossing the white line, the trail would get up closer to the Laidlaw intersection, actually be a surface crossing at the
Well,
Laidlaw intersection.
I understand it comes up at Laidlaw, but then it goes down through the park and exits at the south end at that 90-degree borderline of the park, correct? So I'm just pointing out that there would be an access point down there by trail.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate the conversation.
Yes. Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm just getting a chat from the team here. So the guardrail that's shown there is pretty conceptual at this point, so it's not determined just exactly how long that needs to be at this point based on finished grades in that area. Let's see. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Okay, we've also been working with our partners at Clean Water Services, and we appreciate their assistance and input. So we've been going through this effort. So a few notes here regarding some of the surface water solutions that I alluded to earlier. Both alignments are going to need to review us and assess the impacts on wetlands and streams, and our partners at CWS are certainly a part of that effort. And then the stormwater runoff from any new or modified impervious area will need to be managed in accordance with current standards for water quality treatment, and that will need to be factored into either design. In both cases, Clean Water Services has recommended and will certainly explore low impact development approaches for managing the stormwater, so ways to do it other than just big ponds. And then a note again that the downhill area, which is down closer to the creek itself, could be enhanced in such a way to provide improved ecological function and while also managing the stormwater flows there. And again, I think those approaches can be taken with either alignment. Next slide.
So for me, I think the bottom line message here is that Clean Water Services has been involved, and they're confirming that any, not only would any impacts need to be handled and managed, but things could actually be enhanced as well moving ahead. And this, as a result of this collaboration, if they had objection, sorry, my tongue was getting a little twisted. If they had any objection that any of these alignment options would not be feasible with regard to wetlands, streams, natural habitat, that they would have spoken up about that, and they have not objected. So thank you. I understand the information, the new information.
Thank you. Yeah, and Diane, feel free to jump in if you have anything that you'd like to add at this point too.
Chair, you summed it up really well, that either alignment could be accommodated. It's just different strategies would need to be used.
Yeah, and I would say, and I think we maybe didn't touch on it a little bit earlier, but we do have some additional concerns about the environmental permitting with Department of State Lands and Army Corps with regard to the west alignment. But and one of the primary concerns there stems from the need to sort of take the approach of avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts. And so in some cases with projects, they do take a pretty hard look at other alternatives. And so there's some concern, but they're also not willing to go on record on a particular approach until we actually formally present a project proposal, which requires a significant amount of additional work to get to. But maybe Ben or Terry or Joe might have any insights about that before we move on.
Yeah, Stephen, I'll just jump in just for a second here.
Sure.
I think that you laid it out really well. Both alternatives do have their series of issues. And I think that, like you said, additional design work and investigation, especially on the environmental side, needs to be presented. And that the Corps and the DSL will be and NOAA will ultimately, if there's some endangered species, would ultimately have the final say and approval on how we approach that. And how can we adjust things? Like as you said, avoiding would be great. Enhancement is certainly that option. And that would be looked at no matter the alternative. And we can address that as just maybe one might be more costly than the other ultimately.
So just for a matter of time check here, we started the meeting at 2. We're almost at 3, and we have about 9 more slides left in the presentation. So we may have to minimize the number of people that provide confirmation on the point.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair. All right, let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I alluded to earlier, we did hold an online open house. It was open between April 15th and May 8th. Next slide, please. There were a total of 843 people who viewed the open house, and we had 164 people who provided comments. I want to note that the open house did not specifically ask people to provide a preference on their alignment, but you can see quite a few chose to provide some input, and so we tried to group those responses that seemed to have a preference for one alignment over the other, and about 35% or so stated a pretty clear preference for the west alignment, about 49% for the eastern alignment, and then about 16% didn't express a clear preference. And again, some of the rationales that that we've already talked about were mentioned by proponents for both alignments. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I want to just touch on this 130th Avenue north of Laidlaw Road. There is a gap in that roadway that was a discussion at the prior meeting. This is just a photo that shows a portion of that future roadway that's currently still in private ownership and so has not been improved at this time. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this again, this is a view with north being to the top of the slide. And so there would be some additional work, as I said, and some right-of-way acquisition needed in order to actually improve 130th Avenue and open it up to public traffic up adjacent to the Arbor Heights neighborhood. Let's see, so we've looked at this and done a preliminary cost estimate of about $2.5 million for the work that would be needed up here if the county were to desire to proceed with making those improvements. I would note that because 130th Avenue is a neighborhood route, this project would not be eligible for either MSTIP or TDT funding, so we would need to either wait for development to occur, or we would need to look at other potential funding options if there were an interest in advancing this as a publicly funded project. Next slide. So that's just a slightly more detailed view of that work. I think we can move on. Next slide. So I do want to just remind the board that additional information is available about the project on the project open house. It's co.washington.or.us/Saltzman, and quite a bit of information for folks who are interested in perusing it all. And that does include links to the project advisory committee, the PAC, meeting summaries, agendas, comment evaluation forms, and a variety of good information there. And I didn't say it earlier, but I certainly want to, if there may be members of the PAC that are watching today, we certainly appreciate their volunteering their time and energy in that effort. Certainly do appreciate it. And next slide. So for next steps, again, determining an alignment will help identify the amount of additional funding that is anticipated to be needed. As I mentioned, we are proposing to advance Saltzman Road for consideration in community engagement around MSTIP 2328 project candidates later this year. And again, the next steps down below assume that if funding is identified and confirmed, then the project could proceed through the engineering, design, environmental, and right-of-way and construction phases over about a 2-year period. Next slide. So back to the questions here. So is the board prepared at this time to provide guidance on a preferred alignment? If so, again, what information would you like to provide? If not, additional information needs that we can help meet. And then again, just if the board has any preference or input regarding bicycle facilities, we certainly would welcome that input at this time as well. That concludes the presentation. So happy to take questions or comments.
Sorry, my machine went a little bonkers there. No, Virginia, this is a work session. We do not allow questions from attendees. Let me just ask Commissioner Fye, in case you may be here by audio only, do you have any questions or comments at this time?
Thank you, Chair Harrington. No, I'm here on
Okay,
camera too, but
okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't know. Okay, other commissioners, questions or comments on these various questions for the board? Who would like to go first? Commissioner Rogers, I see you're unmuted. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting, a lot more in depth than I think any of us would have on our own localized project. So I'm not used to this level of feedback on a particular project, but my systemic question on all of this, Stephen, is that I remember, I mean, this project is not new. We've been talking about it for years and years. And each commissioner through the MSTIP has had allotments of money, and Commissioner Treese hasn't had an opportunity yet to go through her allotment because she's new enough. But previous commissioners really didn't put a lot of their allotment on this, so we find ourselves in this situation today. But with all of your scenarios, I feel really not particularly inclined, for me specifically, to pick any preferred alignment, because it's all cost and money, and there's only so much money we have, and we each allocate that according to the needs. So in District 1 and District 4 and District 3, we all have needs, and we got 40 million coming up, and we're going to spend every dime of it. And to pick any alignment that's particularly high is, you know, somehow going to have to come out of MSTIP or other funds, and I don't know what other funds you're going to get, but those. So I really think this falls on my colleague Pam Treese's shoulders of what she wants as a preferred alignment. I think that's the right person to make the call, her and the chair, I guess, because they're the two that represent this area. So they make the call, and then if there's some financing to do it, great, good on them. I mean, that's really my preference, to sit there and say, yeah, in District 3, we would certainly like to shift a bunch of money to make a particular alternative work. I'm not inclined to do that. So if that sounds a little parochial, I'm sorry. I try to be county-wide, but I understand the hydraulics of the dollars, and I really don't, and I never will understand as well. Commissioner Treese and Chair Harrington, I never will understand the project as well as those two will in terms of what needs to be done. So that's where I'm at.
Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Rogers. I think I appreciate that. I also want to thank Stephen for this presentation. I've had many conversations with staff. I've had many conversations with constituents about this issue, and frankly, my thoughts have gone back and forth about this. This is a project that has pluses on both columns and negatives on both columns. When I look at this, I look at what the recommendations of the PAC has been. I look at what the future holds for this area. I've learned from the chair to think about connectivity issues, and I am I believe that we should be going with the west alignment. That's where I sit. I recognize the cost implications. I recognize what that's going to mean, but I'm also thinking to the future. And as we develop as a county, I think that it will be the best option. So, I feel really compelled, as I mentioned before, to listen to what our PAC has told us. And in the long discussions with staff, I think they're saying both options hold benefits and both options hold negatives. So my preference is the West.
Commissioner Willie or Commissioner Fye? I might have caught Commissioner Fye off guard earlier, which is why I wanted to come back to it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Roy. I think I'm willing to defer to Pam and the chair on this. They've certainly done a lot more homework than I am. I would suggest that you scroll on down in the slide presentation there, and it has a variety of kind of an overview at the end, and it looks like it's slide 48 or something and on down, and it just asks about pros and cons east and west on environment, traffic impact, bridge or culvert, property impact, those kinds of things. That was informational to me, just to give a perspective of Western and Eastern in those regards. So yeah, I don't think I'm I'm not ready to make a vote one way or another on this, but it does kind of imply that the Western alignment would be the preferred alignment. But I'll defer to you two on making that decision. That was a puzzled look, Catherine, so I don't know if that was a good thing or not.
I'm a little puzzled by the reference to slide 48 and 49 because with the packet, those pages.
I think, Chair, that's referring to the more
The
detailed
document
alignment
comparison?
comparison. Yeah, the handout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It
Okay.
follows right behind the presentation in the packet. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am looking at the packet, not the slide deck. So I apologize for that. But yeah, that was just good information.
Okay.
And
Go
Chair
ahead,
Harrington.
Commissioner Fye.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you. I think I'm happy to support Pam in this and the recommendation around the Western, which seems to be the preference. And I echo the comments that both Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Willie made. But sounds like Commissioner Treese, you did your due diligence, and I think it follows what the recommendation and the path that staff have been moving forward. So just following this project and the presentations the staff have been making, it sounds like the Western set seems in agreement with, especially the committees and the stuff. So I support your recommendation.
Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate hearing all of that. I want to express my thanks not only to our staff, but also to the community. You know, going back to that May 2021 work session, and wow, we've been through a lot together since then. We were going through a lot preceding that too, but I recall the options that we had before us then, and I know that I had some questions which staff, the consultancy, and the PAC have followed up on, as well as the community meeting that Commissioner Treese and I attended. I remember way back when in March and in a prior community meeting saying, look, you know, I'm pretty agnostic on the options, but here are some things I'm concerned about. And one of those concerns was on the potential environmental impact. And I see that staff has gone through and done that legwork to make sure that we weren't picking an option that as we move forward would just get totally rejected because we hadn't done some level of due diligence. Our staff has done some level of due diligence, which has told me that enough due diligence has been done to enable at least enable a Western alignment to move forward through the process. It isn't doing the work that will be needed further down the process, but we've done enough of that testing work to be comfortable with moving ahead. I also had some concerns about the visualization and wanted to make sure that the level of visualization had been improved. And since I think our May meeting, our staff has done, and the consultants have done just that. So that's really good. They've also done what they can to make sure that we have our eyes wide open on costs and impact, but especially on costs. One reason why we have spent time on this project and the options is because just like the extension of the Basalt Creek Parkway, a major bridge is involved. And when major bridges are involved, we're talking ka-ching, ka-ching, big dollar signs. Okay. And these are county-wide investments. These aren't just District 2 investments. These are county-wide investments in an arterial that supports the growth management decisions of the County Board of Commissioners over decades. So we can't just lay this out on one commissioner or two commissioners. The tables could be reversed at any time. And we're certainly dealing with a bridge enhancement in South Hillsborough that we talked about as well. So bridges, big bucks equals process and due diligence is what it boils down to in shorthand words. So I will say at this juncture that I appreciate the work that staff has done, and that includes all the community engagement. I think we have enough information at this juncture to move forward. And I've seen enough at this point, while I remain in a state of wonder as to when the project will happen. It'll happen when the funding is available, okay? But I've seen enough to say, could an eastern alignment be achieved in a way that reduces the impact to the housing and so forth? But what I want to make sure, we've heard all kinds of feedback about the impact of the eastern alignment on the neighborhoods on the eastern extent, right? So that Bannister neighborhood versus how Laidlaw Road and the 130th Avenue have gone through visioning. So while the Western alignment includes a big dollar effort, it is a dollar estimate that matches the extent of the work, and I believe will accommodate the modal needs of that community area. So I really think that what we've heard from Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Willie is concern about it's a big dollar investment, but that doesn't say you choose a different alignment just based on cost. There are many factors that go into it. And I have not heard them say that because of other factors, why they would not support the Western alignment over the Eastern alignment. So at this juncture, I concur in moving forward with the western alignment as the preferred alignment alternative. With regard to the bicycle and pedestrian facility preference, I heard your point earlier, Mr. Roberts, about should a multi-use path be considered for the uphill southerly direction on the western alignment. And possibly, I'm more concerned though about the fact that with multi-use paths, I have not yet seen the county having the commitment nor the discipline to keep such solutions cleared of debris. This will be a bridge that has a curb, right? So that means it stands a bigger chance of being debris cleared compared to a multi-use path in my knowledge set. Now, when I think about the level of comfort for, because there's a school right up the road, right? Or south, I should be saying. Findlay Elementary School, Stoller Middle School, right? And, you know, teenagers especially are using not just longboards and skateboards, but not only human propelled scooters, but battery operated scooters. And is a multi-use path better over a buffered bike lane? You know, I think for me, this is one where at this juncture, do I have any preliminary guidance? Not that that leans significantly one way over the other. I don't recall what we decided on or what the decision was on the similar project of the extension of the Basalt Creek Parkway. It too has a long span. They're different in terms of those lengths of spans, but they're still appreciably high compared to the geography that they need to join. And so I would say, given that they're each arterials, now this one doesn't serve an industrial area like that one does. But I remain convinced that the buffer bike lane sidewalk option will serve the community sufficiently well. But you and your team may have further data down the line or up your sleeve right now that I'm really not absorbing with regard to the question that I heard you express verbally versus this one. Can I leave it at that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's a topic that we certainly can continue to explore. I think you mentioned the Basalt Creek Parkway extension, and one big difference here, that's an arterial, as you mentioned, and industrial.
Yes.
That project will have a multi-use path adjacent to both sides of the roadway. Probably the big difference here too, besides the sort of the nature of
Did I freeze or did Stephen freeze? And he's in the building.
I think it's
It was
Stephen.
Stephen.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Not hear you.
Oop. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. see if I can hear you. There you are.
Something is wrong. Oh, now we can see you. Turn your
Okay.
video off and just talk to us.
Okay. Let me do that. All right. Apologies. Yeah, Zoom apparently crashed. So we certainly can take a look. And again, I think where I got cut off was one of the differences here, certainly from the other project, is the grades of the roadway. So we have a distinct uphill and downhill, where the Basalt Creek Parkway is a relatively flatter. I think it's about a 4% grade. So not flat, but certainly not quite as steep as this section. But we'll take the input that you've given us, and we'll proceed with exploring different alternatives.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. And it looks like Commissioner Rogers would like us to go back to him.
I don't think I need to. I just references to basalt, and I think Stephen made a good point. It's regionally significant. It means when Metro Council, and our chair was on the council at that time, brought those lands in, those are huge employment lands, and 14,000 employees that are going to go on those properties. And so a very different bridge, and we're seeking federal funding, as you know, as state funding, and so it's just different. So I'm not making any assumptions about this and the significance of Washington County, just saying it, very different kinds of uses on those bridges. So thank you, Stephen, you made the points.
Stephen, do feel brave to turn your camera back on. We at least.
I'll try it. I see a screen, but you're all sort of stretched and frozen.
Oh, okay. Well.
So let's see. Let me try this again here. Okay, can you see me?
Yes, we can. And
Okay.
you're moving.
Okay, great.
So to try and wrap it up, you're giving us 4 different questions. At this juncture, if I could summarize, I believe that we've received a majority who is ready to move forward with the Western alignment as the preferred alignment. I haven't heard anyone express any additional information to assist in their decision-making on the preferred alignment at this time. The major concern seems to be cost. Well, yeah, we're all concerned about cost. And we've just covered the preliminary guidance on bike and pedestrian. Is there anything else that we have not weighed in on that you are looking for, Mr. Roberts?
I think you've answered our questions as much as we could hope for today. I can't see you all, so I am flying blind here. So I don't know if any of the project team members have a quick final question, or.
Well, if I could add to that summary, none of them have raised their hands.
Okay.
So I'll offer you that. I'd take us back to the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
So we understand that this project will go through the MISTIP 23-28 process, which will include updated cost estimates, and then with additional funding confirmed, then the project could proceed to the 4 steps that you outlined.
That's correct. And I would just suggest if anything significant changes from any assumptions or knowledge that we know today that seems meaningful and impactful, we will contact you via memo or something and let you know.
Oh, yes. Standard county policy. We always reserve the right to get smarter.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you all.
Okay, thank you, team.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
I just wanted to again express my appreciation to the staff, to my fellow commissioners, and also to our community for getting us to this point.
All right, so next on our agenda for today, the board has a work session So I need to ask for a motion for us to move into executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660, sub 2, sub D, for the purposes of labor negotiations. We have a motion from Commissioner Fye. Do we have a second? We have a second from Commissioner Treese. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. We will move off of this Zoom link and into the Zoom link that is on our calendars for the executive session. Thank you. And whoever is using the chat, if you could just communicate to staff only lists on that, that would be great.